them and then we
Okay, that's fine. Yep.
do the roll. All right. It looks like our number has stabilized. So good evening. It's not evening yet. It feels like evening.
It's evening. 5:30.
Okay. Well, good evening. It is Monday, December 14th. And Ms. Lewis, if you can start us off with the roll call, please.
Yes. Dr. Baker?
Here.
Ms. Davis?
Here.
Dr. Flores?
Here, present.
Ms. Lewis is here. Reverend Matthias, he'll probably be coming in. We'll wait on him. Mr. Ross?
Here.
Mrs. Williams?
Present.
President Grant?
Here.
We have a quorum.
And Ms. Schottky, I'm here.
I always,
It's all right.
no,
I gotcha.
right. I always copy this down and I think, okay, I'll put you right after Ms. Williams and then, okay, I'm sorry, Jen.
No worries. Thank you.
Did that to
All
Rainer
right.
one time too.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Perfect. I always say, please say aye, because I feel like just telling you guys to say aye is rude. All right. The first order, we have two items under special order of business this evening. And the first one is an update on finance and bonds, as well as the budget. So I will turn things over to you, Dr. Roby.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Happy Monday again. So our team has been really looking forward to this conversation for a couple of reasons. It's an opportunity to provide some updates related to our overall buildings. We'll have a conversation around our ventilation audit and airflow. Also a dialogue about both short-term and long-term plans with respect to our facilities. And implications for the future, including beginning conversations of how this will fit into our anticipated upcoming strategic plan that we've talked about for our academic programs. From our belief, academic programs should drive facilities, including how any instructional model or programming that we offer should manifest themselves into our buildings. The instructional programs and conversations that we'll be diving into will begin, like I said, we'll begin to have those conversations and take shape next year in 2021 with both all of you as board members and then our larger community and stakeholders. Tonight's facility presentation is will have some broad overarching themes that will be discussed that will lead into some other things, including an enrollment audit. And what we're going to do this evening is share what we've learned, asks the board to give the time for the board to dialogue about questions and things that are presented, and then also kind of some conversation about what should be the practical next steps. We want to present several options and answer questions with the implications of both the immediate short-term facility needs, as well as the direction that we should begin investigating for more long-term future facility options, including, but not limited to, looking at our footprint based around our enrollment and the maintenance and upkeep of our current facilities and the overall financial health of the district. I'm going to turn it over to Larry Johnson and Larry Obers, who will provide an overview of the facilities as well as the financial implications of where we are. And then later we'll have a presentation by the team from Plant Moran, and Larry Obers will likely tee them up to give you an overview of what that looks like for future discussions. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Larry Johnson and Mr. Larry Oberst.
Dr. Roby, who will be sharing the screen with the PowerPoint slide? Do you have that, or does Craig already have that?
I did not share it with Craig. Let me pull it up.
Okay.
Hold on.
John is on here. John would have it also.
Oh, then John, are you able to pull it up? And then Craig, can you allow him to share the screen?
But first of all, good evening, President Grant, Superintendent Dr. Roby, and other distinguished board members. We want to take this opportunity to regroup and share some information with you and just bring some closure to some information we shared with you several weeks ago around the challenges we were having with ventilation. But this also ties into the remaining phase of a bond that this community so graciously allowed the district to obtain several years ago. And as we come down into the final stages of that bond and with the issues that recently occurred with around COVID-19, it gives us an opportunity to not only the words you'll hear is right size and the district and right size facilities. It gives us an opportunity to really take a strategic look at what we need to do as we move forward, but more importantly, how to spend remaining bond dollars as we go ahead. So we had the opportunity to take a look again, very critically at all of our buildings and those buildings that have left to have some work done. This board here, several years ago, after approving the work to be done, we outlined several buildings or several strategies in which we would go about fixing buildings. At that point, we get to the point now where we're at the last phase of that. And because we're at the last phase of this, we thought it was important, the superintendent wanted to share with you our best thinking as we move forward. But we wanted to overcast this by talking about the ventilation issues that will tie into what we're doing. And then at the conclusion, Plant Moran will talk about the enrollment and facility utilization, which also ties into our thinking as well. If you can go to the first slide, please. Currently, we have our outstanding bond projects that are still remaining to be done in the district. And these are projects that we said we would really originally do. But again, we have a qualified bond and it allows us to make some adjustments and movement of funds to other programs as this board and the superintendent directs us. So we were scheduled to do about $4.5 million worth of work in both Riverside and Westwood, over $22 million in Central High School, Innovation Central, the Montessori building, about the 1.7, Point Created Arts, $1 million, Congress, 1.7, Sherwood Global Parks Academy, $2 million, an additional $118,000 for work at Franklin campus. And then there was some professional contingency services. We're going to continue with our technology upgrade. And of course, COVID has put a real stretch on our need to upgrade our technology to keep fresh technology in the hands of our staff and our students. And then there was some additional security upgrades that was occurring inside the district, all to the tune of just over $47 million. So we looked at this and we had several options. But as we began to look at those options, we realized we had some other critical needs. The next slide, please. The next slide refers to some work that Plant Moran had done around our building utilization and the excess capacity that we have. In our current buildings portfolio, we have about 1 million square foot that is excess capacity. That means that those are space or buildings that are just underutilized. When Plant Moran began to look at this, and again, they will talk about this more in depth, annually it's costing us about $10 million if we're not utilizing that space and we don't have the students in place currently. So we also have some critical needs around all of our facilities, and that includes roofs, boilers, HVAC systems, our parking lots, playgrounds. If we were to do all of this work, we looking at all the assessments as provided by Plant Moran, we're talking about $187 million of work over the next 3 years. Currently, if we reprioritize some bond funds, the $47 million that are left, we believe that we can take down some of these priorities and remove them from our list. But as we move forward, at some point, a conversation around building consolidation and closures may need to occur. Next slide. So we present with several options.
Hey, Chief, I'm sorry to interrupt. This, the ventilation slide, this is not the latest version. Do you want me to go to that one first and then you can get to the options?
No, John, I'll just talk right through it. Not
Okay.
a problem.
Thank you.
So we have several options, and we'll present you with 3 options tonight in terms of the utilization of bond funds. And as we get toward the end of this, you will see why it's so important for us to really select one of the 3 options. The first option is stay the course, and we could continue to do the work that we said we was going to do, and that's utilizing funds to address the current projects that you see outlaid in front of you. This stay in the course would mean that we would go into Central High School with about $22 million. We estimate, and our experts in Plant Moran, one of them estimate that we would go into option A, Central High School, with about $22 million worth of work. We're about 10 million short, 10 to 12 million short to really do that program or that building, the kind of justice and work that it really needs. It's one of the oldest high schools serving high schools in Michigan, been over 150 years old. They have many challenges around HVAC, windows, roofs, just a variety, tuck point, just a variety of work to happen. Even if we went in and did the $22 million worth of work, we would still need at some point to come back and do additional work inside of this building. So if we stay the course, we would not have an opportunity to look at our most recent problem, our problem with the ventilation issues. We would be able to make some tab adjustments, tabulation balancing of some of the buildings we've identified, but to really begin to get down into some of the work that needs to be done in other buildings, we would not have the funding. A more critical need as well of staying the course is the issue at Campus Elementary. Last year, we spent about $400,000 replacing the boiler at Campus Elementary. Recently, we found out that a second boiler line needs repair. We need to look at how to separate those lines and repair that system, and it's going to cost us an additional $400,000 to $500,000. So we know, again, critical work has to be done, and if we stay the course, we can do some of this work, but not all the work that we've identified. So we then present you with option B.
Larry, before you go on, so just to make sure these numbers, so all of the numbers here are the numbers that were on the previous sheet for expenditures. So Grand Rapids Montessori was 1.7 on the previous slide.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the numbers will stay consistent. We use the same numbers provided us through Plant Moran and through their facility studies. And so those are.
And when it says add HVAC only, does that mean on top of, or that's the only thing that would be
That
done?
is the only thing we would be doing in that building is HVAC. There's no other additional work that would be done, just HVAC.
That seems different than what I've talked about, but.
Mr. Johnson, are you saying then that the 22 million that we have for Innovation Central, if we stay the course, we'll have $22 million to remodel it? But at Riverside, all we'll do at Riverside is add the HV to that building?
That is correct. If we stay the course and previously identified projects, we would have only a 22 million to go into the HVAC program and to other remodeling of Central. But at Riverside and Westwood, the primary functions of going into those buildings would be to address HVAC, and there would not be a lot of funds left over to do much else at those particular buildings. As I move through the other options, you'll see this opening up and why we want to consider something else tonight. So if we want to move to option B. At option B, we can do at Central High School what Plant Moran has labeled seal the envelope. And there's a lot of water penetration going into Central High School. So in option B, we could go in and spend about $5 million to seal the envelope. Central would not get any HVAC at this time, but we would do the windows, the doors, the roof, and really seal the foundation of the penetration of water into that building to hopefully down the road come back and address some of the HVAC issues that need to be addressed. In option V, we would still keep Riverside on the agenda, as well as Westwood and other and the other programs that have been identified. But option B would then free up some money to address some buildings that do not have any ventilation. And we have a list of those buildings. And again, it'd be about $5 million. It would give us an opportunity to look at roofs in about 13 of our buildings. All of our roofs need some attention. I want to make it clear that with our operations folks, and I've asked the question over and over again, do we have any roofs that are in danger of coming down? And the answer is no. But we have roofs that are leaking, and depending on what type of winter we would have some water penetration in some of those roofs. All of our roofs are on a deferred maintenance program. Unfortunately, all of our roofs are coming to the end of life where they need to be replaced at some point. This option B would also give us an opportunity to address the bipolarization machines to assist with some of the buildings that do not have ventilation. It would give us a temporary fix to get some ventilation into those buildings until we can look for a permanent solution down the road. And they would also give us an opportunity to still look at the pressing need of addressing the boiler and the steam leak system at Campus Elementary. If you can go to option C.
So can I ask a question about option B?
Yes,
so there would be no work done, even, do they not need like HVAC or systems work at all?
At which building?
Central, I'm sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. John, do you mind going back to option B for me really quick? Thank you. So I just didn't know if we were reallocating some dollars to do other work at Central, or, okay, I'm sorry.
That would be correct. We would be reallocating about $9 million if we went into the Central and just sealed the envelope, just took care of the water penetration with windows, roofs, tuck pointing, things of that nature. We would not be addressing any
like
of the
cosmetic things.
At this point, with the $5 million, you wouldn't be really touching any walls in the inside. You're just trying to stop the water penetration inside the building. No HVAC, no cosmetics. We would not be doing much of anything at all in that building because you just wouldn't have the funding to do it. Even if you went in with the $22 million and do the HVAC, which we think is going to come in about $9 to $11 million to do that. Those are items behind the walls that the general public would never see. We then would address some of the windows and the roof issues, but many of the cosmetics and classrooms and that nature and what needs to be done as well, there would not be enough funding to do that. And that's why we want to present you with option C.
Okay.
I have a question with regards to option B as well. I see there it says roof replace 13 buildings with most need. What buildings are those? Buildings without ventilation, add HVC to 6 schools. What schools are those? Are those schools that are currently housing students, or if we weren't virtually, would they be housing students?
Yes, they would be. And I can run off that list for you of if we went to replacing roofs, the buildings that we would do roofs in would be Union and Ottawa. Union and Ottawa both received a significant renovation this year. Both have roofs that need to be replaced. And so we've got a $22 million investment underneath the building where we're going to have some issues with roofs as time coming. So we need to look at those roofs immediately. We need to look at Ken Hills, Franklin Campus, Campus Elementary's roof, East Leonard, and I'll pause and I'll talk about East Leonard later, but East Leonard is probably the worst roof in the district. Jefferson, Fountain, Kennelshea, North Park, Palmer would be the roofs, the 13 roofs that we would look at immediately. The ventilation systems, currently we have buildings without any ventilation that we would want to look at would be Aberdeen, Beckwith, Stocking, of course, Central classrooms only. And then there's a few others on there that we would want to address down the road.
If I can just interrupt for just a second, Mr. Johnson, what I will do for board members, I sent this in my Friday report. I'll send it again. So it's at the top of your email tonight. So it had kind of all those, the breakdown of different buildings. So I'll do that before the board meeting ends tonight. Go
In
ahead.
option C, which we believe is it's a difficult option, but maybe the best option. We would do no work at Central High School. We would not do anything at the entire campus. The reason we would not do the work there is we would hope, and Larry O would speak to it later, that down the road there would be an opportunity for another bond, and the focus of that bond would then be Central High School. It would give us an opportunity to work with the families, the parents in that community, the Montessori families, and all the partnerships and stakeholders of Central High School to really design what we think would be a state-of-the-art Montessori-based and innovation high school that would meet the needs of our students, but at the same time, it wouldn't shortchange projects. We would have enough money to do HVAC, seal the envelope, connect the two buildings, elevator issues and ADA issues could then be addressed. So we would do nothing at that campus, but so all of the funds would then be repurposed to address some more immediate needs in the district and to help address this current ventilation problem that we're having throughout the district. That includes 4.5 million at Riverside, Westwood, Grand Rapids, Montessori would then be addressed. All the top buildings in option C. Ventilation adjustments would then happen. Campus Elementary, the new boilers and the steam system would then be addressed. Our portable bipolarization machines could be addressed. We could replace 13 roofs, HVAC to the 6 remaining buildings and schools that are out there without HVAC. It would address all the ventilation issues that we currently have. We'd update our playgrounds for schools with our most needs. We have many of our pavement or parking lots that have issues as well. So we would need to replace, and we would have an opportunity to replace 9 schools with the most need in our playgrounds, and not playgrounds, but our parking lots. So our parking lots need to be repaved. And then there's some additional tuck pointing and doors that could be addressed. Altogether, that would come up to about $47 million, because we would still address our technology, the security related needs as well. And so we think that that option C, with some C 1.1, 1.2, as we have further conversations in terms of how we adjust buildings and if we have a need to go into buildings. For instance, if East Leonard is a building that stays in our portfolio, then we would need to spend about $500,000 on the roof. If it's not a building that stays in the portfolio, and I'm just using that for an example, then it's money that can be reallocated. So we really have to look at your portfolio of buildings. Plant Moran will talk a little bit more about that at some point, and that would help us assess where we need to spend funds. But altogether, it would be about $47 million in option C, which the cabinet, the superintendent, for much conversation, we believe that option C may be the most efficient way to spend current and existing bond dollars. We would get more broader projects done, and we have a list of those detailed projects, what can be done.
Mr. Johnson, if I may, so if we did this, then every school would be covered as far as the HVAC is concerned?
That is correct. That is
including like Aberdeen and some of these schools, that it would be really expensive to put in a whole new system. We would just use some of those air filtrations, or would we, if we decided to keep Aberdeen in our portfolio, would we have to replace that roof, or?
Say that again, Mrs.
Well, first of all, when we talk about Aberdeen and schools like Aberdeen, the ones that don't have any air conditioning and that sort of school, would this money then put HVAC in all those buildings, or would those buildings still stay with these filtration systems that I've heard about from people?
I'm following you now. Option C would give us an opportunity to address all the ventilation issues across the district with HVAC. The bipolarization machines is a temporary fix. We know that at some point we need to address this ventilation system more permanently, and option C would give us the biggest bang for the buck It gives us more buildings to address immediately. However, down the road, there would be a need to go out for another bond to address the Innovation Central High School campus as our focal point.
Mr. Johnson, my question is with regards to when we received this bond or in the seeking of the support from the public with regards to this bond, was Innovation Central a primary focus in our ask? If it was, can you kind of elaborate on that? And then I'll go to the next part. The other question I have is, as we go to look at putting in HVAC systems in these schools, and for instance, if they come up, it looks like East Leonard is one in question, for example, if we decide to sell off East Leonard in the future, is that something that's going to be increase the value of that building when we go to sell that building? So I'm concerned about if we are looking to possibly be selling off buildings, making that type of investment in a building that would not reap dividends.
Those are great questions, Ms. Williams. And when the original bond we did say we would address all of our high schools. We wanted to address all of the high schools. We know, and with the assessments that were done by Plant Moran, that we have about $22 million currently allocated for Central High School. We know that we're going in about 10 million to 15 million short on this project. So although you would see, although a lot of money would go into that building, quite frankly, from the general eye, you would not see much work done because most of that work is going to be behind the wall into the mechanicals. As it relates to those buildings that are in our portfolio of buildings, those buildings, this board, the superintendent, this board would have to make a decision when we talk about option C, C.1, C.2. We have to make a decision as we move forward. Do we invest in buildings that we may remove from our portfolio? And if those are buildings that we're going to remove from the portfolio, which buildings are they? Can we identify those buildings? Can this board identify those buildings sooner than later so that as we move forward, we do not put any resources into a building that we will not be keeping into the portfolio?
Mr. Jensen, is it straight that we had the controversy about the special ed places? Was it Straight School on the west side 2 years ago when we turned it over to Kent Intermediate, Kent County?
When you say controversy, what?
Yeah, that was straight.
It was straight. Okay. I'm wondering, do we keep that building up? Are we in charge? I know we own that building. So do we pay to upgrade it or anything like that if need be?
That building is currently being leased out, and that was not one of the buildings that we had listed to do any investment in as we move forward as part of this 47 million. We don't want to put money into a building that we're leasing out to someone else right now. We want to make sure that our resources go into buildings where our children, GRPS kids, are.
Right. And how about Beckwith Hills? Do we still own that building?
That is another building that we currently, although we have one program in there, the majority of that building is leased out to the ISD. And again, that's another building that we're not looking to invest in with this 47 million.
What's the timeline for making decisions on this?
I could turn that would be a question the superintendent can answer.
Yes, that's a great question. And so some of this is immediate from the standpoint of, short term, long term, where we're going. If we are, and I'll do the short game first, looking at kind of, options 1, 2, and 3, it will lead into, okay, if we decide with option 3 or option C, then that means that we need to also kind of map out what conversations we are going to begin to have with the Innovation Central High School community. As it's been discussed in this meeting tonight, there were some commitments or conversations that took place in the current bond that we have. And what people have to understand is when that commitment was made, it was to make sure that, yes, we upgrade all of our buildings, but this was obviously pre-COVID. And so we'd have to kind of reschedule a timeline. Larry and I have had pretty detailed conversations about having conversations with our broader community going into the new year, and then begin planning for what that would look like, and then also engaging the community on how that would change that particular building. So I would say we need to make a decision, hopefully by the beginning of January, so that we can get the ball rolling for what our spring will look like, and also the implications budgetarily as we're rolling into the 21-22 school year.
Well, that's pretty quick for these are big decisions.
They
First of
are.
all, I would say that anything other than A will be viewed as a violation of the public trust. I mean, straight up, the current Innovation Central families, the current Montessori families, the historic Fountain Street building folks, the historic Central Building folks, all played a huge role in the passing of that bond. I would consider it a violation of the board's trust, to be honest. I've sat on the finance committee where we've had facilities updates for years. And, you know, I've waited patiently. My son was in 7th or 8th grade when we passed this bond, and he's in college now. And he went to Innovation Central partly on the idea that this was going to be a facility that was going to be state of the art. Innovation Central High School has been the most dramatic growth of any building of any program that we've had. It's on the cusp of being even more. And if we say to the families that, oh, we'll get it in the next bond, I just can't imagine. I can't ask people to support it because I asked people to support it 6 or 7 years ago. And I swore to those families that we would have these buildings. And we went and did city. We did the Fuller building, you know, so that we could have conferences there with this money. And now we're, you know, going to abandon the most historic building and one of the most successful.
Dr. Baker, if I can push back just a little, and again, and now please forgive my newness to the community, and I am not, certainly I hear what you're saying. I want to reframe that. I don't think that we should abandon Innovation Central, and I think that we have to be very strategic if whatever direction we decide to go. What I'm a little concerned about, or what I'm very concerned about, is when you start, that building is 150 years old. It's the oldest building, I think, oldest public high school in our state, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the oldest. And what we want to be able to do it right. And 22 million at present is not going to be able to do it correctly.
Well, we knew this when we asked that for money 7 years ago. So this is not new information. We got $15 million to run the museum high school in a building that wasn't even, and it still only houses a couple hundred students. We went, and I went forward with, when people asked me, should we support the museum high school? I said, yes, we are doing that on top of the monies that we've raised to give the other kids that go to school in that neighborhood a good building to go to school. Float this to the media and see what kind of public response we get. There is going to be so much anger, and to be, how long has this been discussed? I mean, I have been on this facilities committee for years, and never have I heard an indication that we might be taking Central off the list.
And so, in fairness to our team, I want to say that some of this has come to light because of kind of where we are with our pandemic and the ventilation, and kind of, it's one of those things, once you start to peel back the onion, all the different layers that are underneath. And so I can't speak to anything prior to my arrival in July, of course.
The onion has been here for a long time, Leadrine, and that the staff that you're working with now knew about this onion years ago.
And so, but I want to push a little from the standpoint of some of this has arisen to awareness just because of related to our ventilation system and ventilation issues and the things that we are needing to address as we are currently in this pandemic. And so even with the allotment of the 22 million, to your point, not knowing the history or not knowing fully as to across each of the high schools, if 22 million in 2019 $9 would have been appropriate, and it has since changed in 2021 dollars, that may be a variable as well. And so again, we wanted to bring forward what the discussions had been at present, and how do we move forward, and knowing that yes, the central high school issue is something that we're all very, very concerned about, but we want to make sure that anything that we do for any of our buildings is state of the art and will move us forward into the next 10 to 20 years versus looking back and saying, well, this is money that we committed in 2009, 2010. And is it realistic that it would still be appropriate, that same dollar amount and that same value amount in 2021?
Has
I
there
would
been
also
any
like to just
consideration?
have a quick, so I agree with everything that Dr. Baker is saying about how this is going to feel about transparency and honesty. And that is something that this board has pushed. And so while I understand, I'm not placing the blame on anyone that is currently in position and has been working on this. And I would just like to state that Mr. Johnson is new to this role in this department and carrying this work. So I want to put that out there, that I understand that, Mr. Johnson. But my concern is that at some point, like, yes, a pandemic happened, but I want to make sure that if we're having these conversations that we're being transparent, because this all can't be put on a pandemic. And we're going to have to answer to the public and explain why we renovated buildings and didn't touch roofs that needed replacing and didn't, and that's not to say that it's anyone's fault that's at the table, but we're going to have to, I don't want us to enter a conversation and try to offset some of the missteps that had to have happened here, because I understand the view that Ottawa, I'm using Ottawa as an example. A lot of the work that was done, the money that was put there, happened behind the walls where people won't see it and won't feel like the full, you walked into a new building experience. And I know that we're saying this is what would still be happening at Central, but I'm concerned even with the new numbers that we have. Did we take a different approach to these new numbers and these new options to make sure that we were fully encompassing all of the cost? And, because somewhere in the past that was missed. And so for the faith of the board and the faith of the community, I want to make sure that we're being as forward thinking as possible. Not saying that I support any option at this point, but just, there's going to be this gap that where people are like, well, do we have all the information that we need? Are we really looking ahead? Because something was missed in the last round. And so I want to make sure when we're spreading this message that we're being honest about that. COVID has something to do with it, but not everything.
I think that's a fair assessment. And yes, we want to make sure. And similarly, I have asked those same questions about how do we make sure that we throw everything in, so short-term and long-term facilities and upkeep of our buildings is considered. And then also kind of the more fancy 21st century technologies and things, so that our children get to what has been committed previously, the school programming that they deserve, and so that they are state-of-the-art buildings. And then with respect to, again, you have a 150-year-old building, some of the parts and pieces of a 150-year-old building, we can't retrofit that. There's certain things that you're not able to do. And I think that also drives up the cost for that particular building, from the standpoint that we don't have the same parts and the same technology. We have different parts and technology. And so we want to be sure that we're all encompassing of whatever that is. And then, when our team can certainly continue dialogue about this, I think this is a good start to a conversation. We wanted to get it before you so that people would see what we have been working on, what are some of the things that we have discovered. And to your point, Mr. Johnson has taken on this role, as I've asked him to, and since I've been here, to kind of help figure out what do we need and how do we continue to move forward. And then the larger planning around this goes into that strategic planning as we are looking at where do we want to be in 10 years for our buildings.
May I see option B again, please? Is John doing it? Yeah. So if we went with B, but that would not satisfy the Montessori.
And I will make sure again that everybody has this presentation as well as a follow-up. Just as a kind of a foreshadow, Plant Moran is going to also share with you in their report, in their next report, the critical needs and facility changes and challenges that need to come forward. And they'll be able to kind of explain more in detail than what I will or even Mr. Johnson will.
A question,
Go ahead, Jose.
I could defer to you, Jen, if you like. Go ahead.
I just have a curiosity if there's been any discussion about, instead of an additional bond, trying to ask voters for support on a ventilation millage, or trying to instead tackle funding through an air quality specific ask rather than switching the bond dollars around, or if that's even a possibility.
So, Larry, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on that. There hasn't been a large conversation around that. But obviously, you know, again, there's some urgency, and I'm using the term urgency in a more dramatic way. There is a sense of what do we need to do kind of in the short term, as we have some facility needs that we need to address.
That's Larry O, right?
Yeah, Larry O. I'm sorry, Larry O.
Larry O. Good evening, President Grant, Superintendent Dr. Roby, and board members. Before I answer your question, Ms. Schott, I want to make a comment on the previous discussion. Yeah, I was new to the district when this bond plan was taking place, and I think some of you who were around back then may remember that when we did the assessment back then of our needs, it totaled $350 million. Plant Moran's assessment study now is all in is about $335 million. We knew we could not get that kind of money from our taxpayers, and the work we did, we landed on 175. So we had to make choices back then to fit the needs of the district into a $175 million bond. So I don't know that we should characterize it as missteps back then. The simple choices we had to make because we could not get all the money that we needed to do these facilities correctly. All right. Since that time, you may recall we had a sinking fund millage that expired end of 2016. So it's been 4 years since we had any additional funds available for maintenance. And so some of these roofs that Larry Johnson is talking about that now need work, maybe 4 years ago, didn't need that work, but we've not touched them because we've not had the funds to touch them because the sinking fund millage expired. To answer your question, Ms. Shockey, to do what you're talking about would really result in a sinking. We have to do a sinking fund. A sinking fund is a millage on property tax, and it would be a direct increase to our taxpayers. I've had conversations recently with our financial advisor as part of this whole thing we're talking about tonight. And we have the bonding capacity between now and 2028, so about 8 years, to issue an additional $230 million in bonds in 3 separate issues, and that would not increase the millage rate to our taxpayers. So in terms of cost to taxpayers, a bond is more beneficial than a sinking fund millage to fund any further types of capital we need. When I talk about those 3, I mean, we could issue as early as 2022 another $100 million of that $230 million. Again, no increase to in the millage rate, our debt service millage rate to our taxpayers. Why does that happen? A couple of reasons. One, we've had strong property tax growth in this county and certainly within our district for the last several years. We continue to pay down old bond issues. So those are dropping off too. All right, so our debt service and the old bond issues is diminishing. And thirdly, as you're all aware, we've been in a very, very, very favorable interest rate environment for a number of years that will continue. I mean, if you listen to economic news, certainly this pandemic in terms of keeping interest rates low has been helpful. And we're talking at least another year to 18 months where interest rates are historically low. And so the debt service cost to our district is significantly lower than it has been historically. Those are the three major reasons why we could issue these kinds of bonds if we need to and not increase the cost to our taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Oberst. That's really helpful.
This is Kim as well. Oh, I'm sorry, Jose, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My question on the stay the course in option A, it reflects everything that was in the original bond request, right, or millage request.
That is correct.
Okay, I have to agree with Dr. Baker on this. That politically speaking, if this is what we asked for. I recognize that a lot of work went into this, and I give you guys a lot of credit. Your team is certainly on point in giving us other options. But, we really have to be conscious of the fact that this is what we presented to the voters of Grand Rapids, and this is what they approved. And for us to sidestep what was originally presented to them and that they approved, I think, it may be perceived as deceitful. And I don't think that would be a good step politically for the leadership of this district at this time, or at any time. And in fact, I think that what we ought to do is explore other options, and that this is a work in progress. And I certainly, for one, appreciate, having, the options of B and C and D, and they obviously, take into consideration our overall needs. I would hope that perhaps some of the hope that we put in the federal level of new funds coming down the pipe here to deal with some of the emergency needs that we have, some of these needs might fit in there when you talk about ventilation systems. I don't know, but I think that it would behoove us to take the route of trying to be transparent and try to spend the money as we originally presented that the money would be spent.
I appreciate the comments on that. And let me say, for our team, the team that I am leading, of course, we are trying to be transparent. So please forgive and put it on me from the standpoint of, we wanted to present some additional options. And again, I will own being newer to the community, of course. I wanted to make sure people got, what they are looking for the future. And it's not lost to me. I don't want anybody to feel as if they've been hoodwinked, so to speak. And so, yes, if that's the direction that this board would like to go, I just also want to make sure that it's clear at 22 million, there still will be a shortfall. And I'm thinking also for future of this community and planning of this community, as we're talking about, how do we draw students into our schools? It also has to be, how do our buildings look and present to them as well? And so, there's not one, with all of 2020 and everything that we've done this year, any choice that we make come with a consequence, or a unintended consequence, so to speak. And so, if that is the direction that the board is feeling most comfortable with, yes, we will certainly work within that option. Yet and still, we want to make sure that we are very clear that at 22 million, our facility may not look in the way in which we are expecting, or that we desire it to look, for attracting more students to that particular program. And so, and again, with transparency, this is what this is all about. We are not saying that we've made a decision. We wanted to bring forward some other things to think about and the rationale, the why behind it.
The 22
Well, I
million doesn't
appreciate
have
that.
to, sorry, Dr. Flores.
No, no
22
problem.
million doesn't have to be the end of Innovation
Right.
Central either. I mean, this could be
Of course,
phase
yeah.
one of renovation, and the next bond could lay out then phase 2 and 3, or how many phases we need to get this building to our dream of what career-focused academies look like for our students.
Point well taken. Yes, point well taken. I just wanted to make sure that, again, this is some things to chew on.
That's right.
And
Ms. Williams, I know that you had a comment. If you would like to speak, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give her an opportunity.
Again, I just wanted to go back when we look at the option A of staying the course, and back to our original ask. If the focus was high school, my understanding, I see a lot of work on some of the elementary schools, and I am concerned about that as well when we're saying we just invested money in Union and Ottawa and they need roofs, and we're not addressing that as well. So can you possibly speak to that for me?
Can we bring Long in to have him talk on the
Yes.
Long, if you're there? Craig, are you able to grab Long in?
Yep, he's on his way in now.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
So, based on the history that we had with Union and Ottawa, we didn't have enough money to take care of everything in those, and that's our concern. We're going to do Central, and stuff like the roof won't be touched because we're allotted a certain amount of money, and we can only do so much with it. So that's the factor why we wanted to just do it justice and put the right amount of money in just to get everything taken care of. So yeah, Ottawa and Union, we assessed the roofs at the time. They were, fine. After we did the renovation, we noticed, there's some water leaks, and we've been trying to fix those and making sure that water's not leaking into the new work that we spent money into. And this is just an ongoing battle right now. And Innovation Central, obviously is an older building. It has a historic feature that is going to, add more money to that. And we just want to make sure that the 22 million goes far. Because right now, I think 22, we could probably get away with the HVAC and tuck pointing everything. But when it comes to interior finishes, you'll notice when you go to Ottawa or Union, there's just stuff that has to be sacrificed. And we just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that.
Yes, and I understand. I guess my question is, I see on here Riverside, West Middle, Grand Rapids Montessori, Congress, Coit, and I am wondering again, if we told the community our focus was on the high schools, why we are diverting those funds to those schools instead of going ahead and doing the best that we can with the money we have for those high schools, particularly because we just spent 22 million or 17 million at Ottawa and Union to leave them with leaky roofs. Seems a way to, it seems like we're throwing good money after bad money, and then we're just, I'm confused about that decision not to try to address those roofs. Again, if our focus to the community and our ask of the community was, we're working on your high schools.
Kim, my recollection is that there was a focus on high schools, but there was a list of a variety of projects across the district, including these. And there were, and I understand the adjustments of numbers, but the schools had meetings and they were like, this is our money. How come you're spending, you said you were going to spend 3.5, why is it 2.7? And so now that was obviously a miscommunication, but those schools were on the list and have been expecting something. And I want to apologize for my tone earlier. Part of this is that we have made decisions along the way, and these are tough decisions. And I do remember, for instance, making a decision about what to do with the Northeast building. We made other decisions along the way, and the board has asked, will this decision impact the broader commitments that we made to the community? And I've always voted on any changes with an expectation that my answer was fulfilled, that if we didn't need the money for this project, et cetera. And again, I'll use the museum high school as an example. There was a sense that we needed to raise money from the community for that because we were keeping it out of the bond proposal, and that with an expectation that Innovation Central High School and the other schools were being taken care of in other ways, and that this was not asking the community for some special arrangement for one school and not taking care of another school. I've had conversations for years. We've always known that 22 million wasn't going to be enough for Innovation Central, so it's really tough. I think it's if there's another way to package a millage or bond proposal, it's personally, I feel personally, I've worked for this one, and so that explains my personal response. It's not a personal decision though, but from my vantage point, we are, and as Jose said, I mean, we are definitely disappointing people who expected something different, and I think it'll be really a tough sell.
I appreciate that feedback. And again, you can charge it to as I am learning, and again, trying to advocate for what's best for all of our programs and how do we shape what this will look like in the future. And as with, anyone who has ever had the experience of building, construction and things of that nature, you start out with what the estimate is, and it always changes. So, and it kind of depends on what you discover as you are, peeling back that onion, so to speak, that it may ebb and flow a little bit. And I think that's with every construction project and every kind of renovation program. And we want to, hold true. And I know that the community has been just champions and supporters of our district. And we want to make sure that our word does mean something. And if we are changing directions, the why of why we're changing directions is clear. And so if I can just reiterate, it was because of kind of where we are with some of the things that have been uncovered in the last 6 months or so, that we were trying to make sure that we were addressing some of the other needs that we know we have going into the future. Are there other questions before we move on to the plant Moran portion of our discussion? Because I think that will start to tie some of these other things together.
I'm just going to ask, and maybe it makes more sense after Plant Moran, but that we revisit just the timeline of this and the steps for that. So if the Plant Moran piece makes sense to do first, then that would be great. And I'm sorry, Mr. Ross, did you have a question?
No question. I can wait. No big deal. It's in line with a lot was already said, so no worries. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Oberst, if you can tee up what will take place with Plant Moran, and then we'll allow the team from Plant Moran to present information and engage with the board.
Sure. As you all know, Plant Moran, their real estate Cressa group, we call it. They've been managing the bond program for a couple of years now. Pat Podges, I don't know if Pat is on the phone call, leads that bond management process. We've also worked with a number of other folks within their group, and we've got a couple of those guys here today. Greg Van Kirk actually leads that Cressa group, and we meet with him from time to time. Paul Wills will be doing most of the talking today. We engaged this group, and Paul in particular, back in the spring, summer, fall, to go through a more in-depth enrollment study. They also did, as you've heard, a building assessment of all our buildings, and went into all the buildings and kicked the tires, so to speak, and looked at everything. reviewed maintenance records from the past, all that kind of stuff. And then as part of that, being in the buildings, you also did a utilization study. So they looked at the space we had in each of these buildings, how it can be utilized, how it is utilized, and took all that information, and they will present tonight what they did and what they found and some observations. So I don't know, Greg, if you're going to start it off, or Paul or whoever, but I'll turn it. Oh, there's also, I forgot to mention the fourth person, Jeff Egberts, is Plant Moran. He's been the audit partner. Many of you have met him over the years. He's also here tonight with his colleagues.
Yeah, I'll start off quickly and then turn it over to Paul. It's been a pleasure being a part of the Grand Rapids Public Schools team the last couple of years. We got involved after about a year or two that the bond got started, and I think the team just laid out a great plan that everyone's worked on. You know, the $47 million left and how do you spend it, and then coinciding with potentially, you know, we did an assessment holistically that showed the dollar amount of well over north of $300 million to kind of finish the loop and potentially do a bond issue after that. We're really not tonight here to talk about a lot of that. It's more about the enrollment projections and the utilization. We're happy to come back and have Pat join us and work with Larry J and Larry O on whichever kind of alternatives you choose to go down and how we can assist and put a bow on that last $47 million and make it go as far as possible. But tonight we're here to really talk about enrollment and utilization. And what we did is we're really providing a high level overview to point you in an order of magnitude, and then get your feedback. The detailed reports are available with the district. So any of the specifics, and if you want to climb into that detail, we're more than happy to come back on any of the specifics. But tonight is really an overview of our findings and to give you a directional kind of view of where we think the district may be headed. So with that, Paul, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. And good evening, President Grant and Dr. Roby and board members. I'm going to share the screen here. So if everyone can, let's see here. Everyone can see the screen? Thumbs up. Okay. So as Greg mentioned, my name is Paul Wills, and I've been with the firm for over 20 years. And Plant Moran Crest, so we're actually one of the 4 firms recognized by the Department of Treasury to provide enrollment projections and utilization studies for school districts. So we work with very large districts, Detroit Public Schools, Utica Schools, Ann Arbor Schools. We also work with some of your peers, Lansing Schools, Wayne Westland Schools, et cetera. And we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But the 2 things that we really want to talk tonight about is the pupil enrollment projection study. We're going to take a look a little bit at the demographics of what's happening within the boundaries of Grand Rapids Public Schools and Kent County as a whole. We're going to look at your historical enrollment, and then also take a look at your 5-year projected enrollment. And then we're going to transition into the facility utilization study. So again, taking a look at your 3.3 million square feet of academic spaces, taking a look at elementary school level findings, as well as the middle and high school findings. Just show you some synopsis, again, to Greg's point, some high level ranges and oversights for your peer districts, and then some key takeaways. And by all means, again, this is a work session. So if you have any questions as we're going through this, by all means, raise your hand or stop me, and that would be great. So the first slide we have, the purple polygon is actually the school district's boundaries. And so again, we know you're really consisted of, Kent County or Grand Rapids area as a whole. On the left-hand side, what you'll see is what's happening within that purple polygon. So currently there's 75,826 total households. Again, a household is as people filed on their taxes. Of those households, roughly 36,549 have school-aged children. And below that line, what you'll see is that equates to roughly 48% of households would have the school-aged children within the household itself. The average median move-in year is roughly 2009. But really what we're focusing on is this 34,812 PK-12 students that are enrolled. So you might ask, Mr. Wills, you're missing about 1,700 kids from that 36,000. That's correct. Those students are not currently enrolled in either a PK program going forward. So what we're really looking for is, what are those students that are currently enrolled in a PK through 12 program? And the public pre-primary, again, roughly 71.25% are in the primary for public. 28.74% are a tuition-based program. So that could either be a denominational or non-denominational tuition-based. Transitioning into the public school K-12, so roughly 79.48% are enrolled in public, and this does include charters. And then 20% or 20.52% are actually enrolled in a private tuition based program, again, which is tuition based. As Mr. Van Kirk mentioned, we do have this broken down actually by quadrants within the city. So again, what's happening in the northwest corner might be different from the southeast corner going forward. From a state's perspective, the state average is roughly 90% choose a public school option and 10%. So you're about double in terms of the private school selection relative to the demographics. On the next slide, we're going to transition into the live births. So again, this is information that's audited by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. What we're showing in here is really since the year 2000, the Kent County has gone from 9,500 live births you see here. The last blip was really in 2007. Since the Great Recession in 2008, it's basically dropped to levels almost 1,000 less births per year over a 10-year period. And the most recent audited births are roughly 8,600. So when you take a look at really the K-5 cohort plus the next incoming cohort, you're about 1,000 kids less per year, which equates to roughly 10,000 less kids in Kent County. Actually, this looks very similar to what's happening in Oakland County, Ingham County, Kalamazoo County, and other large counties around the area. So as a whole, it's important to note that, what is that capture rate that Grand Rapids would typically see out of those eligible K births going forward? So what we're showing here is kind of your historical enrollment over the last really 8 years. So going back to 2012, where the district had 15,342 births. The 2016 count was 15,067 births. And the most recent official counts that we just received here in October was 14,510 births. I do want to publicly acknowledge the Pupil Accounting Office and Larry Oberst's office for really getting us these information. So this information is also audited by the Department of Michigan, Treasury and Education, and that's how you get your foundation allowances. One of the things we want to point out is over the past 8 years, the enrollment has decreased by roughly 800 students. And some of that is contributed to the live births, and others is just options as you go through middle school and high school cohorts. The next two graphs are, again, I'm not expecting to read the eye charts, but it's really the 5-year projection. So that thick black line you see down the middle, everything to the left of that is your historical data. And the 5-year projected enrollment in 2024-25 is going to be roughly 13,968 students. That's broken down roughly by the number of K-5 students you see here of 7,436, grades 6 through 8, roughly 3,164, and grades 9 through 12, roughly 3,368. Again, in the next 5 years, that relates to roughly a 500 student loss over the next 5 years. And as Mr. Van Kirk mentioned, a copy of the full pupil enrollment is included going forward. I did want to focus a little bit. I know you can't see the birth rates, but going back to that 2007 birth year, the district traditionally captures roughly 15% of those eligible births. So what ends up happening is when you go from 9,500 births down to roughly the 8,600 births, you're going to see a pretty significant drop at the kindergarten level in those cohorts as they move through. We transition to the utilization. So as Mr. Oberst mentioned, we did have a chance to actually tour over 3.3 million square feet. So I want to thank Long and his staff for walking through the facilities over the last 6 months. And one of the things we look at when we do utilizations for other districts, as well as GRPS, is we're looking at the classroom levels. So again, we're not including gymnasiums, art rooms, music room, computer labs, other dedicated special education labs. We're really truly looking at what are those general education classrooms, as long as any vacant classrooms that were in the facilities. From a state standpoint, the state wants most districts to run at 85% utilization. Again, we're looking at classrooms that are roughly 600 square feet or more. And the next several slides are going to kind of show our findings from those various walkthroughs. So again, this is just a sample graph from the report. What you have at the elementary level is you actually have 625 total educational classrooms. But when you back out some of the special education and dedicated classrooms of roughly 70 classrooms, you end up with about 556 total classrooms available for general education. That includes the 426 plus 116 classrooms. We're looking at roughly 24 students per classroom, which gives you, of your 27 facilities, roughly 13,344 student capacity. So based on your 5-year projected enrollment of 7,932, we divide that by 13,344. That gives you an elementary utilization of roughly 59.5%. So when you back out the 13.3 or 13,344 students to your projected enrollment, you have capacity at the elementary level of roughly 5,400 students. So we start looking at some of your peer districts, and we have some analysis as we look further down, but most of your peer districts, their elementary school levels range between 400 and 600 elementary students. We know you have 26 facilities at the elementary level, and we know some of your facilities, again, are not your traditional K-5, but you have 12 that are the K-6 and K-8 cohorts going forward. But of those 26 facilities, 13 have less than 300 students. 11 schools have between 300 and 500 students, and only 2 schools have over 500 students, which would be the average of your peer districts going forward. We did the same analysis at the middle school level. Again, of the 6 middle school facilities, again, understanding a lot of your K-7s, K-8s are included the elementary level capacity level. You have 74 general education classrooms, plus the 33 vacant, which ends up with 107 total classrooms. Again, 28 students per classroom gives you capacity of roughly 2,996. Again, taking that and subtracting the projected 2270 gives you utilization of roughly 75.7%, which relates to roughly an additional 726 students capacity at your current levels. Again, looking at your peer districts at the middle school level, most of those district buildings would range between 500 and 800. Of your 6 schools, 5 are less than 500, and only 1 school is actually over that 500 mark, which is at the lowest end of the middle school of your peer districts.
Paul?
Yes.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
Would it make sense to talk real quick that the elementary utilization is a little bit lower, in the middle schools higher, because there's a blend of some, as you said, grade levels. Some are K through 8, some are K through 5, which skews some of those results, which in the end, that's why we'll do a blend on your entire utilization.
No, that's a great point. So again, out of your 26 facilities, 15 are your traditional K-5, and then roughly the 12 remaining facilities are in that K-6 or K-8 as kind of displayed here on the lower left-hand side of the graph. That's a good point.
Hey, Paul, I have a quick question. This is
Sure.
Jen. Can you define a peer district?
Absolutely. I'm going to fast forward to the slide real quick. Here's your peer
We're going to
district.
get to that.
Ah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Reading ahead in the test, right? So again, this is the middle school. And then at the high school level capacity, roughly 229 general education, 27 that are either vacant or non-dedicated. So again, 30 students in a classroom gives you a total capacity of 7,680. Again, looking at your projected 5 years of 4,307 gives you utilization of 56. So really at the level of the high schools, you have roughly 3,300 additional students that could be accommodating your current configuration. When we look at your peer districts, they range anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 students. I'll just tell you some of your peer districts are as high as 1,800, 1,900, but we were looked at it as, where those that, again, are kind of in that same ballpark. So again, you average about 567 students at a high school building. So out of your facilities, 6 are less than 1,000, and 1 is actually over 1,000 going forward. So board member Shock, you had asked about the peer districts. So coincidentally, we work with 7 out of these 9 peer districts. So again, Lansing schools, 26 facilities, about 2.7 million square feet. Really what we're focusing on is this educational square foot per student. And so again, you can kind of see the varying number of facilities. Here's the standards enrollments, and then here's their square footages. Most districts, they'll average about 2.375, roughly 168 square feet per student. So I think you heard Mr. Johnson earlier talk about approximately 1 million square feet. So again, you're roughly 3.311 of educational square feet. If you look at your peer district's average of roughly 2,300 square feet, that equates to roughly 936,000 square feet of additional square footage that you're operating, and that's not necessarily being utilized by your students or programs. Here's more of just a graphical representation of that. What should be known as Lansing schools, Ann Arbor schools, Wayne, Westland, Warren, pretty much everyone on this list has gone through some of the hard decisions that Grand Rapids Public Schools may consider relative to maybe some short-term answers to utilization, as well as that long-term planning that we heard talk about early in the presentation. So some of the key takeaways, and then we'll go back to questions and answers. And again, we can go back in the presentation if need to be. So really over the last 8 years, the district's enrollment has dropped roughly 800 students. It's about a 17% decrease from 2012. We use the general fund allowance or foundation allowance currently of 8,111 students. So even from last year to this year, the 270 student drop equates to about $2.2 million this year. And the problem is it actually compounds year over year over year. From a 5-year projected enrollment standpoint, just under 14,000 students. Again, this 5,000 or 500 student decrease is about a 3.5 decrease in the percent in the next 5 years. Again, even just looking at from last year to this year's enrollment projection loss of 151 students, again, that's an additional $1.22 million that the district will have in decreased funding going forward. From a facility utilization standpoint, holistically as a district, you're roughly 63%. As Mr. Van Kirk mentioned, these numbers are a little skewed just because 12 of your elementary schools are really K-6 or K-8 facilities from that standpoint. But as a district, you're at 63%, which is significantly less than 85%, which would be recommended by the state. When we take a look at your peer districts, they average roughly 168 square feet per student. You're about 228 square feet per student. And so again, looking at your 14,510 students currently enrolled, that's where we come up with the 935,000 square feet. One of the benefits we have of working with 35 of the top 50 districts is we understand what's their operational cost just to operate facilities. So we're looking at things such as maintenance, insurances, inspections, testing, and building specific personnel costs. These range anywhere from $8 to $10 per foot. So when you take a look at your 935,000 square feet, this equates about to $7.4 to $9.35 million a year just to operate your facilities, which is taken away from programming and some of those staffing costs. On the last slide, one of the things we've really done is taking a look, and again, as Mr. Van Kirk mentioned, this is just a very high level range in order of magnitude. So we took a look at your projected enrollment, kind of the decreases. So again, here's the 542 less students in the next 5 years. You have the foundation allowance. Keep in mind that every year it could go up or down depending on the allocations from the state, but we just ran it at the $8,111. So again, it's a $2.2 million in fiscal year 21. Again, it compounds. So again, you have a 3.4, 4.5. And so really over a 5-year period, it's about $22 million less dollars to the general fund due to decreased enrollment. The second half of the graph, what you're looking at is still that 935,000 square feet. Again, $8 per foot to $10 per foot. So over a 5-year run rate, about $37.4 to about $46.75 million. Again, what this 935 does not account is that as your students are lost, that actual square footage would go up in terms of unused square footage going forward. So at the end of the day, over a 5-year period, because of decreasing in student enrollment and excessive student capacity, the district's looking at about $59.4 to $68.75 million impact to the general fund. So with that, I'm going to stop and open up for questions, answers, thoughts, and comments.
So when you make these projections, you are making them based on the number of babies that are born in Grand Rapids, the city of Grand Rapids?
Actually, Board Member Lewis, that's actually a great question. That's one aspect of it. So we actually take a look at what's happening with the demographics. So after the K enrollment, we actually adjust the first grade through 12th grade enrollments based on what we're seeing in that enrollment or demographic report that we talked about. So we're looking at new housing starts, what's the average age of the parent in the household, job foreclosures, new job starts, manufacturing, et cetera. I feel very proud of the last 20 years. We're about a little less than 1% of accuracy or I'm sorry, of missing that mark. So about 99% accurate for the majority of our districts. But yes, we do adjust that, not just on straight births, but really what's happening on the demographic piece of the district going forward.
How do you account for like school of choice, places where there's competitive charter schools, et cetera, versus, I mean, your numbers seem pretty spot on to me, but I do wonder, especially on the Northeast side, we've lost a lot of students through basically competition, not through birth rates, but through competition. And if we were better at competing, would that make much of a difference?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So this is actually our second year doing the enrollment projections. So working with Mr. Elburst and his staff, we've kind of created that trend, if you will. We actually broke it down actually by quadrant within the school district. And as Mr. Van Kirk said, we've got kind of a much deeper report on the enrollment pieces. So I think Board Member Baker, we do take into account the charter schools, again, trying to create that. The one thing, if there's a new charter school, let's say that comes online next year, we wouldn't be able to project that until we get that fall count or that spring count. So we are incorporating any competing entities, including homeschool, virtual school, and charter schools going forward. So and your situation, again, is very similar to Lansing, Ann Arbor, Wayne Westland, Warren, Dearborn, where there's a lot of charter school competition. And different portions of the district are just socioeconomically and diversity different. So again, we're taking that in considerations for those enrollments as we go forward.
What about competing neighbor districts like Kentwood and Northview?
Yeah, so again, we're taking a look at resident only as well as the incoming, inbound, and outbound students. Again, some of that information is actually readily available through the Kent ISD, so we're incorporating that into the overall report. I guess the one thing I would just want to let the board know is there's going to be 10,000 less kids in the next 10 years, about 1,000 less a year. And so even if enrollment, was the Wild West, which I know every county has a little different understanding between peer or neighboring districts of what that looks like. Just keep in mind, there's roughly 1,000 less kids over the next 10 years that everyone's going to be competing for from that perspective.
This is Kim Williams, and I have a question. You said it's broken down by quadrants. Do you have that information to share with us, as well as can you share with us possibly a reasoning or rationale how we go from 7,000 elementary, 7,400 elementary students down to like 3,400 by high school? Can you give us some information as to why that is and kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, let me try to see if I can zoom in here. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. 1 second, bear with me. Let's see here. All right, can everyone see my screen there?
Mm-hmm.
So as we mentioned, your kindergarten births, back in 2007 were roughly 9,500. It's now roughly 8,800. It's going to go down, continuing that less than those birth rates. Again, you're capturing roughly 15%. So you've got 1,500 in 2012, 2013 school year down to 1,283. But one of the challenges we're seeing with Grand Rapids Public Schools is when they hit that 7th, 8th grade cohort, the little percentages that you see underneath each of these is really the growth from year to year. But when they goes transitions from 6th to 7th grade or even 7th to 8th grade, there's about a 5 to 10% decrease. So again, we can't tell you why that happens. We can just point it out to saying, hey, here's some opportunities that between the 6th and 7th grade transitioning, or even this 8th to 9th grade transitioning, that there is an opportunity to potentially do some student retention. Again, what are other districts doing? What other some of your competing factors are doing with programming? I think you heard Dr. Roby earlier. She talks about, let the program, let the form follow function, let the programs drive what the facility should look like. So we know that, teachers teach kids, not the buildings. So again, doing a deeper dive at those levels with your administrative team, maybe as to the why, I think it's probably more of on the academic piece. Again, I'd have to let Dr. Roby and her team maybe describe a little bit further. All we can do is simply point out kind of the trends and where you've been for the last 7 years at those levels. But that would be the explanation, Board Member Williams, of that decline from that kindergarten level, kind of through that middle school, high school transition.
And the quadrant information?
Yeah, so the quadrant information, I don't have it in the report here. We can work with Dr. Roby and Mr. Oberst to provide that to you. What's interesting when you get to this level right here, let me zoom this back down. So as a district, roughly 80% or 79% are choosing public. When you start looking at the different quadrants, so in the Northwest quadrant, it's roughly 81% choose public schools. The Northeast quadrant, and again, what we did is kind of took 131 and kind of, I'll call it 196, if you will, and kind of quadrated the district. But when you get down to the Southeast quadrant, which is kind of more in the East Grand Rapids area, only 76% are choosing the public, whereas 24% are choosing private. So again, some of that is discretionary income within those various areas. But again, that full report that Mr. Van Kirk talked about, there's pages upon pages about, basically what you're seeing here, just further, divvy down into each of those quadrants. So we've been more than happy to work with Dr. Roby and Mr. Oberst to get you that information.
Excuse me a minute. You didn't mention how many kids in, so you did the Northeast, you have that Northeast quadrant or no?
Yeah, so I'll back up. So the Northwest quadrant, roughly 81.8% are public, which leaves 18.2% private. The Northeast quadrant, 82.7% are public and 17.3% are private. Southwest, it's 85.4% are public, 14.6% are tuition-based or private. And then Southeast is roughly 76% public and 24% private.
And the public would include charter and competing school districts.
Correct. So one of the analysis that we were able to do is take a look at your enrollment for those schools. Just how you see this boundary, we had each of the quadrants in the same demographic report, if you will. And then that way you can see how many students you're actually losing to the charter schools or those other competing entities, other like schools of choice, things of that nature.
Also, we want to make the point of when we're comparing the elementary to middle school in particular, elementary has a larger grade span if you include pre-K 5, and then traditional middle school is usually 6, 7, 8. So there's fewer grades that would accompany as we're comparing those different groups.
Correct. And I think really at the end of the day, you have to look at your 14,510 students you currently have as the fall count. Understanding that probably for the first time in a long time, you'll be below 14,000 students. Again, when you take a look at your footprint, how do you right size that footprint? And again, we've worked with 7 out of your 9 peer districts of these hard decisions, but the most important part is they took control of their own destiny and made some of those short-term hard decisions, as well as, looking long-term of how to preserve programs and really just right size their facilities. And at the end of the day, we would love to see Grand Rapids Public Schools, control their destiny, like much of their peer districts have done over the last 5 to 10 years.
I have a question. When you talk about peer districts and right sizing, so we know the first options that come to mind when we talk about right sizing. I'm really hoping that we can be innovative in how we choose to really leverage our assets and our facilities. Have you seen what would be some of the most innovative projects or solutions that you saw come out of the work that you did with districts? Were any of them really focused on looking at new ways to utilize the square footage or right size their districts?
Yeah, actually, President Grant, that's a great question. I think one of the advantages Grand Rapids Public Schools has is you've already have that, I'll call it non-traditional, K6, K5, K8, where parents and students are actually used to that level of building configurations. You've got some of the, you have 6-12 schools. Again, some districts really struggle with having, how do you separate the kids with a school within a school? And again, I think Grand Rapids Public Schools has done a really good job of having those different cohorts that really answer to, like, every parent's different. And so I think at the end of the day, I think the one thing that I think GRPS has a leg up on is you already have some of those configurations already in place. The community's accepted it, they're embracing it. At the end of the day, you also have to look at, what are those low-hanging fruit that could help, preserve those operational dollars short-term, like in the very near future. But more importantly, I think what we heard was, what does that long-term academic plan look like? And so, we heard, I think, from some board members, like, how do we handle the Northeast corner? Like, is it facility? Is it looking at programming? Is it, maybe it's a combination of both. So again, I think to answer your question, you've done a great job of creating those different cohorts that I think are well received, versus your peer districts where, like, it is very hard to go from a K-5 and convince, middle school and even high school parents, hey, this is going to be a K-8 or a 6-12 high school. So I commend the district for already taking that lead.
The other thing, the other thing we're seeing is you don't necessarily want to always take things away. And so some districts, a la Ann Arbor schools, they're really going to probably be closing a couple buildings down and merging and building new. So in their bond program that they have right now, they are looking at actually closing down a couple elementary schools and then building a new one. And so that makes it feel a whole lot better when you're doing some creative ideas. And so the fact that you could potentially do a bond issue of north of 200 million, you could potentially look at some options like Ann Arbor did, which is, well, maybe we look at, shuttering these 3 buildings and merging them into one brand new building. And
actually, Greg,
so that's one thing that we're also seeing with our clients.
And I think with Ann Arbor, so we actually Greg and I worked on the utilization enrollment with them several years ago, is actually a timing of the bond. So keep in mind, $1 billion for Ann Arbor is going to be over 20 years. And so when Greg says they're going to build up potentially new elementary school, either on an existing site or an expansion of the site they have currently, they're going to design it and actually build it, but it's not going to impact the current, let's say, K-4 students that are in that building, because those students are actually going to be out of that building by the time the new one comes online. So as new families come in, as new families are enrolling, you said, hey, when in 2024, guess what? Your kids are going to be attending a brand new elementary school that's in this neighborhood concept. So it's not necessarily, I'll call it the neighborhood down the street, but still within that geographical neighborhood that Ann Arbor census for their elementaries, and same thing for the middle schools. So some of it's timing.
I'm wondering if anybody knows how, I'm sorry, Christian. I want to know if anyone knows for sure how much or how many kids started to come to, I think it's Buchanan that we redid. Was it 2 years ago? Jen, you were there with me when we had that opening. Was it Buchanan? Maybe not Buchanan. What was it? They redid the entire school.
Yeah, it was Buchanan.
Okay, and they redid the entire school, and they, there was a lot of community enthusiasm because, some of us were there, and there were all kinds of parents and community members there to, for the opening of the new school. So I'm wondering if that increased the numbers of kids going to that school, that making it so attractive in the neighborhood, having something so nice in the neighborhood.
If I'm following you, Mrs. Lewis, what you're asking is, what was the enrollment of Buchanan prior to it being? Yes. Okay, we can get that information for you. Okay. So it came online in 2016. Is that when it became a new school?
Looks like 2018.
Yeah,
2018.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Give me a couple of days and we'll get that information.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. And I had a follow-up question. So really what I'm leading to is my concern is that when I'm hearing of, to Mr. Oberst's point, it will be continual upkeep, once we, even with a new building, we have to be able to upkeep it, and that is going to take money. And so my concern is that when we're speaking about being able to pay for something, we're speaking in terms of a new bond or a new millage. And those are tools that we have at our disposal, but I'm concerned if we only have those things to rely on, even if we right size the district. I'm just looking at the where the economy is going to be 12 to 18 months from now. So to continually go back to our community asking them for more money when all signs are showing that a lot of people are going to be in a different financial situation than they were before. So when I kind of ask about creativity, I don't know if there are other districts who have been able to be creative about leveraging their assets. And of course, there is the sale of a building. That's a one-time kind of injection of funds. But then after that's gone, if we sell a building for $1 million, it doesn't address costs that we have of $20 million or, ongoing. I'm wondering if, and maybe you don't have the answer to this. I'm just hoping like that there are other districts who have done the work to say we need a continual stream of funds that we're able to tap into to keep our district moving, maybe not pay for everything, but help pay for some things.
Yeah, I think one thing that we're seeing very common is, routine bond issues. So, but by way of example, a lot of those peer districts have went out, for multiple bond issues within the last 5 years. So that is a new trend that is happening. The other trend that is happening is these mega bonds, which are, you ask the voters one time, but like Ann Arbor, you ask them one time for $1 billion over 20 years. And so we've seen, Livonia schools, we did their $195 million bond issue back in 2013. Next May, they're going to go out for another 185 million or 186 million. And so if you look at all these districts, Warren Consolidated Schools went out in 2015 for $135 million bond issue. They are planning on going out again in 2021 for another $135 million bond issue. So what you're seeing is recurring bond issues that happen on a regular pace. And as Mr. Obrist pointed out, it's because you have historic low interest rates, but more importantly, taxable values have stayed strong and actually grown. And so the millage rates aren't changing, and voters are actually feeling fairly compelled and strong empathy for the situation that school districts are in. So we have seen more bond activity in the last couple of years, including in COVID. So in May of 21, I think every single bond issue of no new money that went out passed in the state of Michigan, even during a shutdown. And then in August and November, more bond issues were passed, even in the middle of a pandemic. So we are seeing a lot of activity. As Paul said, we work with a lot of these districts, and the bond activity amount on a recurring basis with no new money versus it used to be in the past, a lot of districts would wait and do a bond issue every 20 years. And they'd do one big one and then be done, and then it would fall off. They'd wait 20 years and then do another one. Now they're in a little bit smaller increments on a regular basis, but they're getting approval one time for that multiple series kind of bond issue. And I think as Mr. Obrist said, you could go out for 3 series and 230 million. So that'd probably be spread over a 6-7 year period, which allows you to kind of continue to fix those things, Ms. Grant, if that's answering your question.
Well, I was just wondering if there was anything outside of that. I do appreciate that we do have people who work really hard on our bonds and millages, and we have had a community that supports them. So I appreciate that as well. I was just wondering if there were other tools that we could add to our toolbox. But thank you very much for that.
President Grant, I know it's not on the list, but Greg and I worked with Farmington Public Schools. So they had a $70 million bond in early 2000. They went out for a $131 million bond in 2015. And actually the major part of that bond was actually closing Harrison High School, which if you're a football follower, it was one of the most successful football programs in the state. But the community really looked at it and said, how can we partner with the municipalities? So the city of Farmington Hills, they actually purchased Farmington Hills Harrison for $500,000, and then they're going to pump in about $25 million and create a recreational center. So again, they collaborated with the cities to really look at, how do I keep this jewel of a facility take it off the district's footprint. So again, I know it's not appearing as one of your peer districts, but they were able to save $12.5 million of unwarranted capital for a high school that only had 800 kids in it. So again, they had that tough decision. And I think to Mr. Van Kirk's point is every single one of these clients up here, as part of their bond message was, we're not taking something away, we're actually giving you something. So Lansing Schools, if you're looking at their bond, it was $112 million. I think they had 3 or 4 new facilities in it that were really creating, spaces that could really, adhere to the district's programmatic needs, but more importantly, offset some of those facilities that were underutilized. As Greg mentioned, Ann Arbor Public Schools, I think they're going to go dang near replace all 32 facilities over a 20-year period, either on site or adjacency. Wayne Westland Schools, they got rid of a middle school, but created a K-8 STEAM Academy, which we kind of know you've already done the K-6 and K-8 programs. That's why I think you're ahead of the curve there. Dearborn Public Schools is working with Henry Ford Community College and looking at, how do I create some CTC programs or early college programs to help offset some of their facility underutilization. Livonia, as Greg mentioned, they made a tough decision, again, to close 3 elementaries and middle school. And from a board president standpoint, Ms. Burton, she's the board president. She went to school there. Her grandkids currently go there. And again, they had to make that tough decision because if not, they would drop below that 5% fund balance that the state will then become, kind of the destination. And Walled Lake, the last one, it was a $317 million bond issue. And again, there's probably 4 brand new facilities, but they basically took 6 offline as part of that bond to really make sure that the utilization was good. And they're being built in the similar areas. So again, they're giving back and providing something more than just, taking away or putting, good money towards bad. So again, I appreciate the candor. And I think one of the things we're looking at is what did we see is a lot of collaboration between municipalities. Again, if there's vacant facilities or sites, how can you develop that for residential housing? So we've worked with a lot of districts and legal counsel and bond counsel to help districts through that. But
yeah, I was going to say that's probably the last thing is, Warren Consolidated Schools closed down a middle school, 25 acres, and did infill housing. And it was so successful that they're now doing that with like 3 different other schools where they're closing the school down, doing a major renovation, consolidating some schools, and then selling the property and doing it in such a way that it's a development of its housing that will attract families to continue to put kids back in the district.
May I ask a clarification question with respect to that? As you work with municipalities and kind of both districts and the municipalities, as you alluded to, in Grand Rapids proper, my understanding is that we are going to need housing for, I want to say 5,000 more.
Yeah, it's a big number.
It's a big number.
And so here's the question in that, because what you all just explained is that our birth numbers are going down, but our housing needs are going up. Is it housing for school age children? Because it could be, and it may be a combination of more senior housing and things of that nature. I just want to make sure that we can wrap our mind around as we are having these discussions. What does that look like for future planning for this district?
Well, Dr. Roby, that's a great question. And embedded in that overall demographic report is, so that housing is actually for, I'll call it household units without children. So again, a lot of it's going to be millennials. We actually subscribe to various databases, but the one that was most telling was Pew Research. So for the first time since 1940, the average age of the first time birth mother is over the age of 30. They're not having the 2.25 kids, they're having 1.45 kids. And so a lot of that housing stock you're looking at for professionals, working professionals, as well as seniors. I think to President Grant's question, one thing that we have seen pretty successful is actually taking elementary schools or middle schools and creating senior living or veterans housing. So we worked with Detroit Public Schools. We actually built a Michigan Veterans Association. We rehabbed an old school and created 30, 900 square foot units, which by the way has a kitchen, which has a workout facility, which sits on 15 acres. It was a great success. It was a collaboration between some nonprofits in the Veterans League as well as the school district in the city. So those are some of those other, creative things that, again, you never just want to stick a for sale sign, say for sale, because we all know, who may be potentially interested in that. So to Greg's point, how do you address the housing? How do you work with the municipalities, the nonprofits? With Detroit Public Schools, we work with 6 various projects from Skillman all the way down to neighborhoods, fund services, and looked at opportunities for, after school programs before schools. But again, there's not a right answer for every district. Every district's unique. And so Greg and I just really appreciate the opportunity to kind of highlight and shed some light on some enrollment challenges that the district has, as well as utilization. And at the end of the day, if some hard decisions have to be made, but again, I think some of your peer districts have been able to do that successfully and move forward.
So some of that housing, Dr. Roby, they were referring to is spurred by the growth and success of Grand Valley and those kids. And I'll be the first to say I have a 22-year-old that's going to graduate and loves being in Grand Rapids and downtown. And so he resides in your district. He's a renter, and he's getting his finance degree. And he probably won't come back to the east side, or maybe he will. I don't know. But right now, where does he live in Grand Rapids, right? And that's some of the housing. But if that housing is created, maybe those folks will stick around and actually have babies.
I think one of the biggest needs that the city talks about is low income housing.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, the development we did downtown Detroit, 80% was low residential income housing. The other 20% was market rate. And we've done a lot of that. Actually, our corporate side has done a lot of that housing stock, both in Ingham County and, as well as across the state. But you're right. I think that low income housing is a huge component of that, and be able to shed some light on that as well.
And I think one thing too, we're looking at, the new babies that are being born, and is that decreasing, and do those families need housing? But we know very well that our current families need housing. We have lost students to other districts because families were displaced due to rising costs in housing, and not just low income housing, but affordable housing. So there are those things as well. We've talked about that before. We went through everything over at Harrison Park, trying to keep families who were being displaced. So that's also a real issue for the kids who are currently in our district.
I have a question with regards to, is there a recommendation as to the school utilization piece on potential closures from you all? And then additionally, beyond that, is it, or I should say, do we have the ability as if we look forward to selling off property to dictate the use of that and to whoever wants to purchase that, those?
Greg, do you want to take that, since you've worked with various law firms and school districts on disposition?
Yeah, we'll take them in reverse order. How's that? First, you can dictate how you do the property if you do what is typically an RFP, a request for proposal, and a mutual development agreement, where you actually sign a development agreement, so it's a joint development. And so that's what we've done at Warren Consolidated Schools. I understand your concerns, Ms. Williams, that you don't want the properties to just put a for sale sign and fall in the wrong hands. You want to fall in the right hands. And so, for example, at Warren Consolidated Schools, we wrote an RFP to housing developers to build single family homes that ranged in price. I think it was $175,000 to $225,000 single family homes, 2 stories, right? Not single story. All of that with the purpose of hopefully that's going to do a joint development that will attract young families that want to maximize their land yield and house yield. And you can control your destiny by doing a development agreement and writing an RFP. If you simply put a for sale sign in, then yes, there are laws that govern you from the ability of picking and choosing winners and losers of who you sell the property to. So you cannot discriminate if you simply just put for sale signs out. But if you actually co-develop the property and there's a way to transfer title and transfer money, what we've also found is that may not land you the highest yield immediately. So by way of example, Warren Consolidated Schools, I think we sold the property for about $1.5 million. we had an offer to buy the property for 2.8. But now there's over 100 homes, with each home having, at least we think on average, one kid that is in the district and going to school. And with an education foundation allowance, we have more than made up that. That's the gift that keeps giving forever. And so it's a smart way of doing disposition strategy. We have talked with both Larry in the past, high level, obviously, discussions, just in general, how sometimes school districts go about those things. But you can control your destiny in your dispositions if you're careful and thoughtful about it, is the short answer. With regards to your second question, do we have an immediate recommendation? I saw the recommendation on Larry J's presentation that he provided that said maybe there's some low-hanging fruit. We don't know what that is. It's all based on numbers, et cetera. You can see where there's utilization on individual schools, but there may be other important factors that are driving the decision to keep a building open versus not. What we'd normally suggest is, if there's some very low-hanging fruit that is obvious and politically acceptable, then try to take advantage of that, and then embark on a long-term strategic plan that wraps everything together and starts to think through, like Ann Arbor and Walled Lake and some of these other districts where we say, and Paul gave the example, we're going to build a new school. And so in 2024, this new elementary school will be up and running. And so we're not going to displace the kids that are in their school. They get to live out their tenure, but the new kids coming in get to move into a new building that's combining everybody from 3 different places. And so I would say the short answer to your question is, if there's any kind of low-hanging fruit that the board and the administration and the public kind of feels this makes immediate sense, that kind of helps with the short-term budgeting issues, but then commence some sort of long-term strategic plan process that I think Dr. Roby and has been discussing with you lately. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, let me just jump in here, Ms. Williams. We have not asked Plant Moran for any specific recommendations. I mean, they certainly can help us, as I think Greg just alluded to, with the developing the process to identify what it might look like in terms of right side. But at this point, we have not asked for specific recommendations. They clearly don't have all the data that they would need to do that anyways, as Greg talked about. Having said that, the situation we're in and the excess we have, I think we do need to look expediently at consolidating or taking offline, let me put it that way, 3 to 5 of our school buildings by, start of school in our 21-22 school year. I think back last spring when we were talking about the budget issues there, and we had some options on there at that point in time, that the board chose to go a different direction, which was fine. But I know I said in the meetings with you guys that this discussion about building is not going to end this budget year. And I think the data that Plant Moran, hopefully the data that Plant Moran just shared with you today shows just how significant we have excess capacity compared to our peers, the kind of drain it is on our finances.
Mr. Oberst, is there a plan to bring us, the board, some recommendations? And if there is a plan, has there been consideration of this RFP plan with co-development?
There's no plan yet. That, I think, part of what I'll defer to Dr. O. It's part of what maybe some direction tonight. We certainly have had discussions from time to time internally about things, options, but we haven't moved forward in any manner yet, pending some further. First of all, with this presentation tonight, letting the board know just where things stand. This has just been completed the last couple of months. But then, As I said earlier, we really need to have a process in place, and any facilities decisions needs to be part of a larger strategic plan. You can't look at facilities in a vacuum, absent everything else that goes on with the district.
And we would like to, again, bring this forward for discussions. This is something that we had talked about this summer and then into the fall, and wanted to make sure that we did get this in front of the board again to say, okay, here we are, and how do we begin strategizing around our next steps, and what does that look like, and then what voice needs to be included in making sure that we do share this with our broader community.
Okay, are there any more questions for the Plant Moran team? Thank you guys very much for that in-depth breakdown. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time and your questions, and we appreciate working with you guys. So, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Roby, I do want to almost piggyback on what you were saying, but follow up to my initial question before Plant Moran started. Just, we know that Dr. Baker asked about when would a decision need to be made, and there was a mention to January, but can we revisit that and be a little more when in January, and what do you see this process looking like? And is that the absolute latest that a decision can be made?
So what I'm going to do, and I'm probably going to give a non-answer, and that's not my intention. So let me say that's not my intention to do that. We want to make sure that, again, that we brought this forward to you all so that you'd have an opportunity to kind of hear it again and begin thinking about what does this look like for our buildings. When we look at the budget cycle, and I'll have Larry kind of walk us through any decisions that we made and kind of where they need to fit. I would say, just very generally, a decision or a discussion needs to happen late January, early February about what our proposal is and what those options include, and then how to move that forward into where does that fall. But Larry Oberst, can you kind of walk us through what a projected timeline could look like, please?
Yeah. And I think there's two pieces here. It's certainly what Larry Johnson went over, and the bond options. We are near the end, as you know, of the major high school renovations. Union is almost done, and we need to move forward and start planning on what our next round. If that continues to, as I'm hearing tonight, that we continue on the path that was initially communicated to the community, then we need to know that probably by the end of January, so we can start that planning process and developing the plans and working the bids, all that stuff that goes with that. The other issue surrounding what Plant Moran talked about in excess capacity, we have to have next year's the 21-22 operating budget has to be approved by the board by the end of June of 21. And as I mentioned just a few minutes, I really believe that from a budgeting perspective, there's still going to be strain on the budget with what's going on. We were bailed out this year, but there's still a projected $1 billion deficit in the school aid fund, and who knows what will happen in Washington if we'll get any help from that. But nonetheless, even absent that, this has been an issue in terms of excess capacity for years here. So I think we need to have in place the process that the board would like for us to embark upon to identify, as I said earlier, 3 to 5 buildings that we could get the appropriate input we need from the board and other stakeholders and have a decision, I'm going to say by May 1st. That's so we know what the impact on the budget might be, and give us time reflect that in the budget to meet the June 30th deadline would be my comments on that timeline at this point. And then, hand in hand is talk about a strategic plan, which includes a facility strategic plan, because we talked about the 22 million isn't going to do it for Central High. We need to make additional investment there. We talked about our bonding capacity, and we cannot go to the community. I think this is obvious to all you, to the community for additional funds without a well thought of, concise, strategic plan for facilities, so they know just what they're going to get. And how much it's going to cost them. And that's going to take a little bit longer. But I don't think we have the time to wait to develop that fully without addressing some more immediate needs. And as Greg mentioned, low-hanging fruit in this district that we could make some decisions on and be reflected in the next budget year.
And Mr. Oberst, when you say, we'll identify buildings and a plan to move forward by that, in advance of that June date, are we saying that potentially we identify buildings and we are no longer spending money to keep those buildings, like for the utilities and the upkeep of those buildings, that will be enough? Or are you saying we need to identify buildings and offload them? I want to make sure I understand.
I'm saying we need at the very least to close down operations of buildings. What happens from that point is a separate decision.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify exactly what we were saying needed to be done by that June date.
I mean, to keep an empty building utility-wise, it's $60,000 to $75,000 a year. But the staff savings of not operating buildings, as we talked about during the budget time last year, is maybe in a range of $1 million a building. So there's some real money there, and so we would have some time to make a separate decision on how what we do with that building. Do we sell it? Do we raise it? Do we whatever? Okay.
President Grant.
Sorry. Go ahead, Tony.
A couple of things. One is, it sounds like I think that Larry, you alluded to this, that we need a facility strategic plan. And this presentation tonight was kind of two presentations. It was, what do we do with the remaining bond dollars, and presumably what do we do with the extra 1 million square feet of space that we have. It seems like, I think I would be more comfortable making these decisions if those two things were combined. Because I don't know if we make one decision, what impact it'll be on the other decisions. I would also propose, this is a proposal, I'm not sure how to think about, I think it would be best if the board was engaged, and since it's the board, the public, just in the ongoing conversation, which I think can actually bring people along. So I don't know if this would be appropriate, either full board, but I think even a facilities committee with 3 or 4 board members to be a part of a discussion over the next few months. It doesn't really matter who's on it other than those that want to do the work, but it just would require public discussion, minutes, and kind of being on top of things as we go, with an idea that it's a 4-month or 5-month committee. Those are just some thoughts, and that way we can be more engaged and less surprised, and also we can soak in the heaviness of all of these decisions in a way that you guys seem to have been soaking that in.
I was going to say something kind of along those lines. In making a decision on the first portion of our meeting tonight, it almost feels a little bit uncomfortable to make that decision without knowing some of what we're talking about moving forward, because I would hate to put money into a school that's going to end up being consolidated or changed. Does that make sense? And I know it might need to be done, but I think we need to keep that at the forefront when we're making that decision on the first portion of our meeting tonight.
I agree with both of you. It's kind of the question I was asking, and not pointing fingers at all, but saying like a broader plan, making sure that we're looking ahead. And then I think Mrs. Williams made a really good point by asking, you know, will these add to the value? Is it worth it if we're perhaps keeping students this year or next year in the building, but 2 years from now, it's no longer used as a schoolhouse? Will it have been worth the investment? So just knowing some things like that before deciding to take dollars away from buildings that will be in use.
My team just reminded me that we did have a recommendation slide that maybe will kind of help address some of these things and maybe tie this better together. So Mr. Helmholtz, are you able to pull that slide back up? And then Mr. Johnson, you can walk through that recommendation, or Mr. Helmholtz and Mr. Johnson can do that together. Mr. Helmholtz?
I'm not sure if John is still there, is he?
Oh, there he is. There he is. Okay.
There you go. Sorry, I was just getting brought in and had to log back into my Google Drive.
If you can walk down to that, that last slide. Okay.
And John, am I walking this or you're walking it?
I'm either way.
Go ahead.
You want me to run with it?
Yep.
All right. So, you know, you'll see pieces and parts of this were talked about throughout this this work session. So as you all know, originally we were recommending that we consider option C as part of the need to potentially repurpose bond dollars. That would come with a promise to invest the right amount of dollars that would be at Innovation Central. We know now, based on what Plant Moran has shared, we, at least in the short term, we're looking at the need for 3 to 5 building closures short term that would happen as part of this year's budget process and would go into effect next year. So there's going to need to be enough time to ensure that there's community engagement, that we are any notices that would need to go to staff because of the reductions in the building and the staffing that goes with that. That's being recommended for this budget season. This would then lead to that comprehensive strategic planning process. Tony, much like what you just said, Dr. Baker, this would incorporate the academic plan, professional development plan, curriculum plan, facilities utilization assessment that Plant Moran just shared, their pupil enrollment projections, the equity enrollment audit that you will likely see a presentation in January. We're coming to the end of that, and that has recommendations in it as well. And then, of course, extensive stakeholder engagement. I think we set the bar when we, in 2012, much like what we did with the transformation plan, and I think you've seen more and more of that around, but that's where we would see this process to include an extensive stakeholder engagement. Then, of course, once we've gone through that, there's the adoption of that new strategic plan. There would likely be additional building closures. And then looking at the pursuit of a no new tax bond that Plant Moran shared a fair amount of information that would not be a tax increase for the various reasons why they shared. And I can certainly get into that if need be.
I have a question. Tony, when we passed this bond issue and we were going to fix up the high schools, And do you think that the community would be unhappy if we still did $35 million worth of work at Central instead of the, was it 22? Oh, no, I don't remember, terrible figures, but whatever it was that we were going to spend on Innovation Central? You think that's something that we can sell the public or not?
I mean, I don't want to speculate on that. I mean, John was, I mean, there's a lot of people here were a part of this. Reynard was a part of it too. I'm not sure about who else was on the board, but my sense is, you know, I mean, I'd like to spend $35 million too. I would, in fact, I like the Plant Moran idea about getting $1 billion bond and spend it over the next couple of years and see. But my sense is that to say we're not using this previous bond money, but we're going to ask you for more money, I think with my sense is that it would look bad. But I think that, but regardless of my opinion about what the public might think, I think that this process here, if we include some sort of board input over a longer period of time, we should get to the right answer of what we should be doing. So, you know, my initial response was the public is going to feel, I mean, I know people who are part of some of these buildings, and especially Central. It was a real, Central itself, it coincided with the anniversary of that school, and people were really invested in that. And I would, you know, I think that if we disappoint, that's a pretty significant group of people to disappoint too. But even the Montessori building, I think that, you know, the other thing about this with the Montessori building, which is the Fountain building, is that we have put off some basic maintenance because we didn't want to put money into those buildings because we didn't want to waste the money by rebuilding it. So, I mean, some like bathroom things that needed to be done, plumbing problems that were just put off because we were going to wait and do it right. And so I think that those are the, you know, and these, the teachers and the parents that are part of these schools feel like these were promises made and we need to make sure we don't lose their support.
May I ask a clarification question related to this? Because I know that we went through the bond in 2012-ish, and I fully hear and appreciate, yes, we made a commitment to our community. Is it appropriate, and here's my question, is it appropriate to come back to the community through the stakeholder engagement to say, okay, here we are 8 years later, what is it that to get to having a state-of-the-art school and making sure the upkeep and all the other things related to the bathrooms and all the other things to make it a welcoming place, where are we now? And is that another opportunity? And again, it's not negating, you know, that we made a promise or we made a commitment in 2012, yet and still things have changed. And should we look at, you know, what can we do from 2012, but then also moving forward, whether it be the listening sessions or community meetings or whatever, you know, that had been done previously as a new opportunity to say, here's where we are in 2000, well, now it'll be 2021.
Yeah, I know. I think we definitely going to have to do that, what you just recommended, Dr. Roby. You know, my thoughts are just listening to conversations tonight is, you know, I think we go that route. I think we would still put the 22 million into Central, you know, as was previously agreed to. But then based on what you just said, we would take that approach to frankly let folks know that there's still more that needs to be done. I think we would combine that more that needs to be done at Central with the realities of ventilation issues that the pandemic has drawn attention to, and that we need to, you know, go for initiate one of those bond efforts that we already sort of have the bond of not necessarily approval, but the bond bandwidth, so to speak, to initiate, and combining the ventilation issues with the more that needs to be done at Central, and then having a bond to take care of all those sorts of things. But I do think it's pretty important to maintain the community trust. I think from a district perspective, there's always been some challenges with that. And I think we're on the more of a positive side with that right now. And frankly, I wouldn't want to roll the dice to hinder that progress at this point.
How much money were we supposed to spend on Innovation Central?
It's that list there, the
22 million, I think, right?
Plan A or the proposal A or whatever.
It's gonna be 22,500,000.
22 million.
No, but I'm also wondering, and not to slight the middle schools or those other schools that were on that list. I think Ms. Williams kind of pointed it out earlier, maybe in one of the options there, that we had some schools in addition to Central on that list. And and I know that the previous bond wasn't strictly just for the high schools, but I do think, since Central is sort of one of our, maybe more vibrant programs from a growth potential standpoint, that it may be prudent to make that investment there. And maybe the next bond iteration, instead of combining more to be done at Central, maybe is combining those efforts at those other schools with the ventilation components to in that next bond effort. I think that also could be an option, and then maybe having more impact on Central right now as opposed to deferring some of that impact on Central.
Isn't some of this heating and ventilation work, isn't it stuff we have to do for the kids to come back to make it safe for them, or have we taken care of that already? That we have some options that,
The ventilation pieces is what you're referencing, Mrs. Lewis?
Mhm.
Yes, and I know that, and Mr. Johnson will have to kind of speak to this. There was some, is it the BPI? There is a temporary kind of effect adjustment, and I think that was an option.
Yeah, and I don't know if Long is still on the Zoom. He could talk more in depth about exactly what we're going to do. The BPI, the bipolarization, is a temporary fix. Individual room devices, and I see Long coming up right now. But we're trying to address the long-term solution if those buildings are going to stay in our portfolio. Long, if you want to speak to it.
BPI is more of a peace of mind. It just filters the air within the space, and we're intending to get that in every classroom. Because some of these buildings without ventilation, it's going to take a year and a half just to get it implemented. It's not going to be next fall because with the design process and the bidding and the construction, with the COVID long lead times, it's going to take a little bit. So at least we can put something in there now, just to make the kids and staff feel safe.
So we do have some temporary plans, so when the kids start coming back, everybody should have the air ventilated properly in light of the COVID and so on.
Correct. And then just to clarify, the Riverside, all the schools that we were still going to do with the HVAC are buildings that don't have ventilation right now. So we still, if we're going to take care of every building without ventilation, we still should consider those.
My question with regards to CARES dollars, are any of those dollars available for use to help offset some of those costs for the ventilation?
You and I think alike. I'm going to let Mr. Oberst answer that question because I asked that very same question. Mr. Oberst, will you address that, please?
I'm sorry, repeat the question, please.
are any of the CARES dollars available for use to deal with the ventilation concerns?
The only CARES yes, we could use CARES dollars to acquire the BPI units themselves. Outside of that, the CARES dollars cannot be used for any capital type expenditures. And so, you know, major HVAC installation as an example, we cannot use those CARES dollars for that. We probably can use some of those CARES dollars for the BPI units.
Other questions that we can address?
Dr. Roby, I hate to kind of keep pushing this point, but in those recommendations, we didn't see any particular schools for the short term or long term in consolidation. And I'm hoping as we go forward and begin to talk about this in more depth, that we'll get more of that information on the front end and be, as Tony said, a part of some of the conversations to maybe brainstorm about that.
Sure. And kind of as I've listened to the conversation unfold this evening, I began kind of thinking about kind of what are the next logical steps. I think it would be important for our team to go back and even create a rubric, so to speak, of what are the conditions, you know, of which schools we would look at for consolidation, and bring that back to the board to say, you know, these 7 items are the things that we've considered. What other things should we consider in with respect to that, and then continue that dialogue, and then see where schools will fall, and then bring that forward again. And so we can work on that. I would say this week, but probably realistically it would be the very beginning of January, to kind of start what that would look like, but to bring some suggestions forward, and we'll debrief afterwards just to kind of figure out next steps, and other schools and other districts that may have done a similar process, what rubric or characteristics they use for at least guiding their decision-making process. Because we want to, again, make sure that we're looking holistically across the district and seeing where our schools fall as far as structure, you know, kind of the long-term maintenance upkeep, the overall health of the building, and then also the growth potential of particular buildings.
If I could interject, I would appreciate also something I've shared with a number of board members and staff before, the concept of looking at our administrative facilities there at Franklin campus also as a structure, and how that might be repurposed in a mode where we also look at how to put more administrative support and some of our assessment support people into buildings a little closer to the front line, if I could use that term. I think that you know, I understand that is a dramatic type of an approach to things, but it is something that I think has been needed over and has been discussed over time. In my history in the district, you know, we talked about the delivery of administrative and support services to the buildings, looking at decentralization to some degree. There's been talk over the years about a quadrant approach or a triad, or kind of a smaller district, sub-districts within our district to manage. You know, maybe now's the time. I think the Franklin campus certainly would make a great development for low and moderate income housing, and I would hope that we'd be looking at some of those options too. The same thing with with buildings and properties that we have that have substantial probability of being developed into housing units. I think we ought to definitely encourage that, because I've also witnessed over the years that we've done a lot of land banking in Grand Rapids. We have taken empty lots and repurposed them for really targeting a lot of these millennial developments that I see. So we need to look at developing housing stock, because I see the demographics in Grand Rapids continuing to demonstrate people of color, with families, with children.
I think to your point, that goes into that overall strategic planning. I think that whatever we do with all of our facilities, Franklin campus, other facilities, should be, again, looking at what are our curricular programs and using that as our driving force for kind of the other supplemental kind of things, where staff are housed, so to speak, and how the buildings are used. But I think, we are in instruction, teaching, and learning first and foremost. We do other things as well, but those are the things that really should be driving kind of the other legs of our district and program, and that goes into that broader strategic plan.
So one small thing. Speaking of programming, back on the option slide, in parentheses with COIT, there was IBO. I'm assuming that's maybe some international baccalaureate reference or something. What exactly is IBO though? That was in parentheses. That was there for each of the slides with COIT.
Yes, COIT is an international baccalaureate program.
Yep. So I was just wondering, IBO in this case, that was some sort of physical renovations or changes to make it more appropriate for IBO and IB programming, or what?
That is correct. That is correct, Mr. Ross.
Okay. I don't need any details about it now. I just was curious. Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions that are rumbling in your minds?
Thanks. I just want to thank you, Dr. Roby, and the team for listening to us and being responsive. So I think that we'll get to a really good place.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, we will move to our action item for this evening, which is the purchasing agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Himholt, Mr. Oberst, and Dr. Roby for having that heavy conversation with us. We will be revisiting it often, so thank you.
Can I jump in on this then? There is no formal purchasing agenda document in your material. And let me just suggest what I'd like to do, President Grant, is part of what we need was pending this discussion, but we're going to have to, and Larry Johnson, I just want to confirm, and Long, we are going to have to acquire some of these BPI units. And we may need up to 300 of them. And that cost was, help me out here, Long, 500 and...
Yeah, almost 600,000.
Pardon me?
Almost 600,000.
600,000. Yeah. We haven't quite buttoned up the details surrounding that, but we also can't wait until next board meeting, which will come after the year, to get approval on a formalized one. So I wonder if you'd entertain a motion to approve a purchase of BPI units up to $600,000, and then we'll complete the details of that and present that at the next board meeting or finance committee meeting.
Larry, one question about that. If CARES Act dollars can be used for that, how much of that cost, how much money do we have left in the CARES Act dollars that can be applied to that purchase? And how much of it will be out of our personal budget?
Well, here's it's a little difficult. The big CARES Act allocation, we have to have purchases done by December 30th. I don't think we actually have to have the material received by that point in time, unless there is some disruption of the supply chain outside of our control. I don't think at this point, even though from what I understand, one of the vendors we're looking at has them in stock, just takes time to get things shipped over to us. There's another bucket of it'd be one of the gear, I think it's the gear funds that allow for expenditures related to health and safety of the students and buildings. That's an application process that we have filed by end of December also. But what I believe is, even though if we can't fund any or part of this with COVID-19 buckets, we do at this point do have some excess bond funds that we could use to acquire these. Remember on the slide that Larry showed you, there was, I don't know what the amount was, Larry, but you had that professional services contingency bucket. What was that, $3 million, Larry? I don't recall what the number is now.
Yeah, I have to pull the number back up to Larry. I have it right in front of me right now.
Okay, so, but just to back up so I make sure I understand.
Yeah.
We won't make the deadline for the CARES dollars, so we're going to try to. I just want to make sure I understand. And if we do have room to still try to, is there enough of our CARES Act dollars left to cover this cost, or just partial, or?
Yeah, there is. Again, we of all the buckets of dollars we have, we haven't fully allocated all of them yet. So there's additional money there, and what can't be covered by those COVID-19 funds, we have available bond dollars to do that. It would not impact our general fund budget, if that's your question is to it all.
I think she was asking a different question. Ms. Grant,
So there, one, I was saying, whether it's CARES Act or other COVID-19 dollars, do we think that we'll have time to make the purchases under those dollars and they'll cover the full $600,000? So I think you answered that a little bit, but just that general clarification would be great if we think we can make the deadline and it'll cover the entire purchase.
Well, the big bucket of CARES dollars, if we can't make that deadline, which is December 30th, the other bucket of dollars, and those total a couple of ESSER buckets in the gear funding, those total, I think over $10 million. They have a spend date expiration of September of next year. So we would have those buckets available. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, especially when we're looking at bond dollars, if we didn't need to spend bond dollars on this, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, clearly that's our last option. That'd be our last option. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone else have questions about this action item? If not,
I don't have any questions, but I guess I definitely would want to nudge if said that one vendor seems to have them in stock. I'm willing to come to Franklin campus to accept delivery on December 31st if I have to. I think by hook or crook, we should make that effort to use those CARES dollars at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
You can use my Prime account.
So if the pre-approval passes, then what will happen in January is you will let us know exactly the exact cost and which dollars were used to make the purchase, correct?
Yep. The information normally see in the written purchasing agenda, we'll have for you in January.
Perfect. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Support.
All right, Ms. Lewis, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Dr. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Flores?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, yes. Reverend Matias is absent. Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Ms. Shotke?
Yes.
President Grant?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Mr. Ross, when you first said that you would be there on New Year's Eve, I was thinking, well, I have plans. And then I realized
no, you don't.
None of us have plans. I can't speak for everyone. Ms. Lewis may have plans. I don't.
Oh, yeah. Me, of course. Yes. Who never leaves her house. Thank you.
Okay. I do not have any notes for any public comment items. Dr. Roby, do you have? Craig, do you know if there's anyone for public comment?
I understand there's no public comment this evening, Ms. Grant.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. This is our last official work session and meeting of the year. I won't run into you guys at the Christmas party on Franklin campus this year, so sad about that. But thank you. I know this was a long meeting, but thank you guys for being intentional and really focusing in on this. I appreciate it. Thank you for
President
Yes.
Grant. May I say something? I just want to thank you for all the work you've done for the last 2 years. You really walked into it. You know, you've hired a new superintendent and you are working through a plague. So other than that, you have done a very good job, Christian, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Hear you,
Lewis. I
hear you,
really-
hear you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, fairly non-eventful 2 years. So, but,